Well, let's start there. I want to start
Yeah, let's
with
start.
one of the reasons when you and I ran into each other at Clayton's wedding, and we talked briefly about you have a podcast, and I had started this podcast, and you had tracked that. And
Yeah.
so when we had that little moment of exchange, and I thought about having you on, I really was captivated by the idea of peacekeeping. So no matter when anybody's listening to this episode, we are recording in 2024, and it's a time on the planet where keeping peace is important, understanding how to get along, understanding how to talk to people who have different viewpoints than you have, how to work with teenagers, maybe who have a completely different reality than you had when you were a teenager. So that's kind of
Totally.
my big pictures. I want to go there with our conversation, but in the true spirit of what I get interested, before I can go to the real point that I want to go to, I always like to understand the context. And I like to start with why law school? What was it about your, maybe even your temperament or your personality as a kid that even got you into this? We're ultimately talking about career path, but I want to talk about life in general. So will
Yeah.
you take us back to early little Scott and any
Little
interest? Little
Scott.
Scott, little
I love
peacekeeping
that.
Scott.
I love little Scott. I sometimes wish he was still in me.
Yeah, I think he is,
You know,
Scott. I think he is.
I, I was the glue of I was kind of the glue of situations. So, similar to, our mutual friend Clayton, in my family, I was kind of the glue, the person that the
Yeah.
positivity, we can do this, like rooting on people. In my friends group, I wasn't the coolest. I didn't get all the girls,
Yeah.
but I added a little spark to it, and was always a little on the safe side too. Like I
Yeah.
made sure things didn't get too crazy.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of like I kind of had I was kind of that chess piece that made things, a little bit better, a little bit more positive. Um, when someone, had something real that happened, I had a bunch of friends growing up that moved to Michigan like in fourth and fifth and sixth grade because their
Yeah.
parents got divorced. And, I always stayed in touch with them. I always called them
Oh,
to say what's up, still friends with them today.
yeah.
So like I was just kind of that I was thinking of others and was always interested in maintaining and furthering relationships kind of like on one step down, one little layer deeper
Hmm.
than, just throwing the ball around.
Yeah.
Um
What birth order
and I
are
just
you? Do
think
you have
that
siblings?
yeah, there's four of us total. I was the baby for 10 years.
Yeah.
So my older siblings are 5 and 4 years older than me,
Hmm.
and then I had a younger brother that was born 10 years after. So
Yeah.
for most, for the formative years, I was the baby. My siblings would say the favorite one,
Yeah.
and I have three kids, so I agree that the
Yeah.
little one always, gets that
It's easy to
special
say
attention.
that. Yes. The dynamic with the baby
Yeah,
being favorite.
but then I kind of played a little bit of caretaker
Yeah.
to my younger brother. I mean, lots of nights that I could have gone out, in high school and stuff like that. We would hang out and we would play. So we were pretty close.
And did you have an inkling early on in high school about pursuing a certain type of career or even specifically law or not
Yeah.
yet?
I'm actually surprised I didn't follow through with this because I was very committed to being like an entertainment lawyer, sports attorney.
Yeah.
From a very, very young age, like that's what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what it meant, or what the day to day of that world was
Yeah.
like, but I was pretty sure that's what I was going to do. I read a book, like Arthur Ashe was like, I played tennis growing up,
Yeah.
as uncool as that is.
Well, it's super.
Now I should
I was
say
going to say it's
pickleball.
super cool now because you can keep playing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. But there was Arthur Ashe's like kind of right hand man or agent was Donald Bell, and was just like a really interesting person that like I kind of was following from afar. He was like one of the really early sports agents. So yeah, I always intended to pursue that. I went to law school, thinking that's what I would do,
Yeah.
and when I came out of law school, I chickened out a little bit. When you had to, I don't know why, I don't remember what my thinking was. Like when I was in law school, I went to University of Virginia, and everybody, was interviewing at these big firms, and like
Yeah.
there were no like sports agencies coming to like hire you. So like I was, making calls, sending out letters. I wasn't really getting anywhere. Um, and, I didn't want to graduate, I guess, without a job or somewhere
Sure.
to go. So I got a job, and let's see, 20 years
Yeah.
later, I'm working a
You're
job.
still at it. What was that first
So,
line of fire? Did you go into family law, or you just went into general practice?
no, I was at a big firm doing litigation and
Yeah.
whatever they gave me. So I worked there for 5 years. I always was big on, continuing to like, I was not networking to get more money or networking to, know more people for the sake of knowing more people. But again, I was just like kind of interested when I went to like, a bar event or like, happy hour with the firm. I wouldn't necessarily talk to 200 people, but I would talk to like 3 people,
Sure.
and we'd have like nice, real conversations. And like, I just knew that like my lot in life wasn't going to be working, for other people, for a big firm. I didn't want to do that. I just needed to kind of understand how it all worked. And
Yeah.
I thought like about 5 years was like, kind of the cycle that I was ready. And then actually my wife and I left that firm originally and we created a fundraising like platform. We have a startup that has been like hot and cold
Yeah.
over time, but like at times it's been like, wow, this like I'm going to be on TV, I'm going to be like a startup
I'm
success
gonna make
story.
it. Yeah.
And then at other times it was like, no,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've done that. So I really put a lot of time into that for about 4 or 5 years. And
Was that
and
at the
then,
same time, Scott, as you were at the big firm?
No, it was after we kind of had the
Okay.
idea to for the startup. It was a really original idea. It had like kind of a niche to it, and so we just left and we self-funded it, and we developed the technology, and we were doing that. We made all the the relationships, the partnerships. We got it from like off the ground to like a real business. But then when I woke up one day, about another 5 years later.
Yeah.
So now like 10 years out of law school. So I'm no like, super young guy anymore.
Sure.
And I had, 2.5 kids. And I was like, well, I think we need to like, have some stable income. So at that point, that's really when I really evaluated like, what do I want to do? Because I wanted to do something impactful. I wanted to do something that could make money, and that where I could like, a lot of factors that control my own schedule. And I knew that I wasn't gonna, just jump back into like a big, law firm life. So that's when I actually my therapist recommended, that I look at mediation originally. She was like, just seems like it's like kind of, I don't know, she had a whole thing of the why, but in retrospect, it really did fit my personality. It really aligned with like, the inner me of what I was trying to, go for.
Yeah.
In mediation, you can make an impact on people's lives. Now, it doesn't change society as a whole, but, you can really have an impact on people and their kids and their futures.
Sure.
I ran into an old client the other day. And this was a tough case. She was, kind of a methamphetamine addict. He was, I guess, or designated or whatever, assigned as a sex addict. And they had this little house, and they had hired attorneys at first, and both attorneys put liens on the house.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what attorneys do when you go through divorce at
Yeah.
first. So to make sure that they get paid, like a lawyer will put a lien on your house before they've started their work,
Yeah.
right? How does that make you feel? That's gonna freak you out. So like they saw that and they were like, wow, we got to try to find another way to do this. So we did a mediation and we were successful. And I saw her the other day. She ran up to me and was like, I'm 9 years sober. This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But she's like, do you know what our house is worth? We're about to sell it. And I was like, you guys still have the house? Because they owned it together.
Yeah.
And I was like, she's like, yeah. And I was like, what's it worth? She was like, that little house is worth 3.5 million.
Oh my goodness.
And do
Wow.
they would have lost the house. They wouldn't have had the house if
Yeah.
they had litigated. It would have been gone.
Yeah.
They would have had to sell it for pennies. So,
Yeah.
on that family and their two kids that are now graduating college, I mean, that little impact, is the why.
Yeah.
And of course, I have a house and, we can pay our bills too. So
Sure.
it's not like,
Well, it's
it's not like I'm not getting anything in return, but it's really
sure.
impactful.
When you say, it doesn't impact the big picture, I think about that a lot in my work because I don't coach couples all the time, but what happens when I take on individuals, most of my coaching practice are middle-aged women. And so if I see an opportunity to bring in their partner, and have a conversation or, I wouldn't call it mediation because we're not reaching a final goal, but it's some space that I can hold where everyone can say what they're really feeling and kind of work our way through that conversation, reveal more, move the needle forward. So it's like this big idea of, okay, stay together. That's such a big idea, or get better in the marriage or be happier overall. And in my experience now, it's the smallest thing. It's the one thing they say in the conversation, or it's the one thing you do, where you make eye contact, when you're eating dinner or, in people's career paths, like in your case, I think it takes a lot of courage to really confront that idea of, I want to do something that fits my skills. I need to pay the bills. I'm a father now, and that's a big idea, like how to change my career at this point in my life where I'm not young. And then it's one conversation with a therapist or maybe two, and then it's one networking coffee with somebody who's in mediation or one, I want to go there next. I want to understand what you had to do to get in it. But like maybe it's training, maybe it's, something that starts so small. And then I think that, in this larger context of our conversation about peace, like just knowing that couple who's now, I guess they're not married, right? They're speaking though, it sounds
No.
like, or they have a co-owned,
Yeah.
asset,
Yeah, they're
which
speaking.
is winning.
They seem to be
That's winning.
friendly.
Yeah.
She said that he remarried. A lot of times, if I see someone, and when I see someone in public, I don't go up to them unless they come up to me. 'Cause,
Sure.
I don't want them to have to say who I am to them. But, most of the time, unless there's a problem, I'm not
Yeah.
hearing from people later.
Yeah. I
So
love
like
that.
what happens
Yeah.
in their lives, sometimes I Google just to see like if there's anything,
Yeah.
out there just to see, but like, yeah, I'm not like getting a lot of follow up later.
Yeah. So tell us about that time. Like, okay, so you get this is the wonderful thing about therapists and coaches and even friends who just can hold space for you and reflect back to you your skills and kind of who you are. So she must have seen in you the little Scott that you described earlier to us, and she kind of plants
Yeah.
the seed. Where do you go from there? Do you explore it with maybe a colleague or somebody who is already mediating?
Yeah. Well, I was not in the best headspace. My dad had died like a year before that, and a lot of like my, he like died at his desk and was like tied to his work, and like his whole life
Yeah.
was his work. And I was like very conflicted. Like I was like, I want to make money and I want to do work, but like I don't want to like end up like tied to my job and blah 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 blah. So I'm still with that therapist because I just have a hard time thinking about like starting over. 'Cause
Yeah.
I know we're kind of like more like friends, not friends, but to start over and give the energy of the background story,
I
I feel
understand.
like it's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
But so where did I go? So there's a guy named Bob Copeland who was a local mediator who ran this group called Second Saturday.
Mhm.
Second Saturday still exists. I actually speak in it now, but basically it's a place for people to go to learn about their divorce options. And it's like $40 to go. It's a nonprofit.
Mhm.
And there's an attorney that speaks. There's a divorce, like this is all about divorce, Second Saturday divorce workshop. So there's a litigation attorney. There's a certified divorce financial analyst. There's a mediator. There's a therapist. And like it goes on from like 9 to like 1. on the second Saturday of every month, and they're all over the place in case anyone wants to look them up. The one that I speak at is at Miracosta College in San Diego. So uh, basically, I went to that second Saturday, like I paid the $40. And I listened to everybody, and I was like studying like family law out of a book. And then I met Bob, and he was gracious, kind of took me not under his wing, but like was like, I'm absolutely, want to help you. He was in his mid 60s at this point, so he's been retired for a few years now, and he gave me his thoughts on like what mediation is and why, and really kind of coached me on the why. And then the how was scarier, right? Like because it's an important process. There's a legal process to divorce that I didn't really know how to do. And then there's a, coming to the agreement part.
Yeah.
And and what I do is both help people arrive at the agreements and then execute on them through the courts so they don't have to ever go to court. So like my clients don't go to court, but I have to like relay the agreement to the judge. So it's a whole, legal process. So I was blessed beyond belief. So Bob had a paralegal named Laura Rydell. Laura is like my second mother to this day. Laura was a paralegal who mediated on the side for about 35 years. And basically she co-mediated with me. And she showed me, how to do the forms, how to, we just kind of talked to people. Co-mediating is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
We still, I believe in co-mediation, especially. I know gender is not the in thing these days necessarily, but like a male-female team, it's tremendously impactful. I still offer it to all my clients. But like, we helped really difficult cases. Some of my hardest cases were the first ones I ever got with Laura.
Yeah.
In retrospect. And so basically, for about 3 years, I just co-mediated with her exclusively. Every single client, that called or whatever, we would do a 4-way mediation. And I just got really blessed. I mean, that's the way. Of course, I took all sorts of courses. There's a guy, Woody Moston, who's kind of the go-to for like, mediation training. Almost every mediator that's been mediating for a decade or two becomes a mediation trainer.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Well, that makes sense
like,
because of the experience and your boots on the ground. You can see where the little traps are with people not getting along.
Yeah. But so like those are helpful. And I spent a lot of money doing those training and I did a bunch of them. But, without Laura, like that's the real training is like doing the actual witnessing a mediation, like witnessing being a part of or witnessing the mediation. That's where I learned how to do what I do.
Yeah. I love that
and
was
it's not,
your...
there's not a lot of people. Not everyone not everyone's going to have access to that situation, but that's my advice to anyone to find that.
Yeah.
And get that experience.
It speaks to the power of partnership. And that's what you're coming to the table. When I first heard about your job, it's like, oh, well, Scott helps people break up. But really what you're helping people do is agree upon a shared vision for the future. So I always tell people if I'm going to see couples, I really want to work with couples who intend to stay together. So we're opposites in a certain way, because it's just a different skill set. It's a different job title. But we're also, everything that rises converges. We're both trying to help people verbalize what they want and work towards this creative future that's different from the unhappiness that you feel in the moment. And I think the fact that you're doing it with Laura is so powerful because that's my hope for our future is that we do learn how to work together better, whether it's together to separate in a business or a marriage, or it's together to build something new. But I think, I shouldn't worry, but I do worry sometimes that we lose some of that in our little silos of holding up our phones or getting in our lane and just researching the thing that the perspective that we already hold. and you sitting
Yeah.
down with a female, different life experience, different age, different background, and working with her is so powerful. It launched your whole career. So I'm glad to have
And
people hear that.
she went through, I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but there was a separation process in her history that was pretty, lawyer focused and unfortunate. And I'm married, I haven't been divorced. So, people ask me that when they're interviewing me, like, are you married? That's sometimes is important to them. But Laura I can tell people, like, this is what's going to happen if you end up litigating. This is what a judge is going to say. I feel very confident. Like, if I'm called on to, like, do that after, all these years, I feel like I could predict. But Laura, so many times would say, look, here's what happened in my situation, and this is what's going to happen in yours if we don't get this rolling. And she would tell, from her experience. But and I think that was, really impactful, and something that I don't have that genuine experience, so it's harder for me. I have to share it through, when she's not there, I have to share either her story or other people's stories where they've fallen out of mediation, or they started in litigation for 2 or 3 years, and then they found me, and then we solved it, like those sort of, stories. But it's not personal to me. And I think that her personal story really impacted people.
Sure. What can you tell us about when and maybe you can't ever know for sure, but when you feel optimistic that it's going to go well, these two people come to the table, they're in conflict, they both agree, or I guess they don't always agree that they want to separate. I imagine sometimes you want one person who wants to end it and one person who doesn't. But can you tell us?
That's harder.
Yeah,
that's hard.
What are the signs when we come to the table, whether we're getting divorced or not? And it could be with someone could be listening who has a business partner. I'm imagining people listening who are married and they're having a conflict. What's like a good rule of thumb where we ultimately want the conflict resolved? Set us up for success. Right there. Yeah. What is it?
That desire to have it resolved is really like 9/10 of the battle. So how we frame this, how I frame my work and going back to your kind of teamwork, thing, it's really teamwork.
Yeah.
We form a team. We're on team us. Okay. The issues of the problem are on the other side of the court. So we're not battling each other. We're on the same team. We're battling the issues. So how do we defeat the issues? We come up with creative solutions. We talk things out. We go over all the world of options. We negotiate. But that when there is one person, and oftentimes, people call me and one of them doesn't want to be there. And what I tell people is not either that, because they don't want the divorce.
Sure.
And I say, if this is going to happen, then I want you to do it the healthiest possible way. That's where I come in. I'm not here. I don't want to get involved in cases where there's real resistance to the process. I have one right now, and it's hard for me to move that along. One person wants to move it along. The other person finds reason to delay the next meeting or to, not respond to emails. And I can't chase people down. I feel awkward being like, when are we going to talk about this divorce?
Right.
When people consult with me, I don't follow up with them until they follow up with me either. My wife's like, you don't like check in after a week or two. I'm like, well, what am I going to say? Like, are you ready to hire me for your divorce? It's
well, I think the nature of a successful mediation, I think also is the person's engagement. You're not tracking people down because you don't want to be working harder than your client.
Exactly.
I have the same thing in my work.
I tell people, they have to be willing participants. I'm not daddy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be scolding people. The mediation is a process that allows the parties to stay in control of the outcome, but they also have to do the work.
Yeah.
So like when people hire a lawyer, that most of the time they're like, here, solve this for me. And that lawyer becomes everything to them.
Yeah.
Like that, they agree with whatever that person says, whatever the advice is, whatever the strategy is, because they don't know, this person becomes their everything.
Yeah.
This is the one person that knows. They don't know. They feel helpless. The person's talking about code section 7453. They're going to hearings where the judge is talking about the number of years and why that matters to sport. Like they don't know these things. It's all foreign.
Yeah.
And so they hand their life over to this person. Um, and it's a very dangerous situation because this person also has 50 other people in that situation that are depending on them. And you're kind of like, you can kind of be like the hapless, helpless, like, you're not taking responsibility for where you're at in life. In mediation, you have to do more work. You have to come up with ideas. You have to be as engaged. I can only push so hard. It's up to you guys to also, fill out the forms that disclose your finances. You can't just like pluck it on to another person. So it takes a little bit of a self starter.
Yeah.
But the reason that I even though there's a couple more hours of work from that I need that person to be willing to engage in, by doing that work, by writing all their bank accounts down, looking up what they think their house is worth, looking up their 401k to see what it's worth, all of that will start to make people feel better.
Yeah.
It's the unknown that creates fear.
Yeah.
So by doing that work and writing all that stuff down, which I asked them to do, and then allowing me to exchange it with them, so now they're seeing their information and the other person's information. That's work that a lawyer normally would do for the person. The lawyer would ask for all the logins, or they would send them a million statements, but not do it themselves. But doing it themselves and then seeing it on the paper, it makes you feel better because you start to get clarity about the situation. Yeah. And the unknown is, the overwhelming feeling. That doesn't go away until you start to get like a sense for like what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so staying in control really actually is really a helpful part of the process and making it less stressful for people.
And I want to add to people listening who are saying, well, I'm not getting divorced anytime soon. What you just said is so key for married people. I talk to so many married people who don't know what the other partner does. Like making a list of how do you spend your time? Well, how do you spend your time? And before you get in fights about the delegation of the household and, responsibilities, actually writing down, you don't have to argue about it out of this unknown, uncertain assumptions or, you have all these ideas about what the other person should be doing. But when you look at the facts of it and you write down, okay, this is what Boyd and I have done this exercise, this is what I've done and this is what you've done. And then you actually can have a conversation about it and agree. I think so much of conflict resolution is finding out even like the 2% that you agree on and both buying into that. And then it moves you forward. In fact, I want to ask you that because I think a big part of your work and my work and anybody in relationship is incremental wins, like momentum that happens. And so I imagine, I've never been in the room with a mediator, but I imagine that in your experience, people are coming to the table with heightened emotions, where it's like these big ideas about, well, we're never going to be able to figure out how to co-parent or how do we split this property. So can you talk to us about how I'm curious about two things. One is understanding how to deal with a heightened state of emotion. So what do you do when the other person is like super entrenched in their passionate viewpoint? And secondly, this idea of momentum, like agreeing upon smaller things to build. I'm interested about both.
I love
those.
momentum.
Yeah.
I mean, momentum's a huge part. So I actually require that, we meet like every week or two because I do think that momentum builds from appointment to an appointment as well, from issue to issue, but appointment to appointment. You have to continue the conversation and build towards that collaboration. There is something to momentum. Totally.
Yeah.
And that's on issue to issue as well. So like on assets or, anything, like you said, this doesn't have to be about divorce, but, there's a lot that you're going to agree on because a lot isn't, a lot is like what the law says or what, people will naturally reach agreements like, okay, yeah, I keep my car, you keep your car. Yeah. Let's add up the values. Let's see if there's okay, yeah, we'll split the bank accounts at some point. We'll talk about that. Like, okay, what's like a lot of this will just, you kind of like go through it in a 10 or 15 minutes, you have this big stack of agreements. And I'm a big, when I tell people that if you hire me, like, you're not going to get robot Scott,
Yeah.
So like, I'm going to like take a second and be like, look at that, guys. Look what we just accomplished. Like, is that,
I love
and they're like,
that.
oh my God, yeah, that's way more. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm a coach, and I'm rooting them on. I'm encouraging them. But when there's disagreement and people, all I can do is help the parties. The first thing is like helping them understand what their perspectives are, like making sure that they're really hearing each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making sure that they're giving each other the space to express themselves. So sometimes I have like this, like a client actually gave me this like 6 years ago, like this cheesy little clock, and it like you set a timer and it starts time. I could do it from my phone, but like this thing kind of makes a point.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, here, let's give it like, because sometimes people are speaking, and I'll look at the other person, and they're kind of waiting for them to take a breath.
Yeah.
So that they can jump in.
Yes.
Like they're not really like letting it sink in.
Absolutely.
So I have to make sure they're hearing each other. So when I'm summarizing things, sometimes people will be like, well, is that what they said? And I'm like, yeah. And also like things can trigger, like, last night I was in a mediation where I totally saw, there was a grunt, or I don't know what you would call it. It came out of, the husband in this situation. I saw that the wife like literally was talking and totally paused. It like threw her off because that triggered her, like that interaction. And I, that's obviously something that goes back 25 years in their relationship. They know that language is unspoken, but they know what it meant. She knew what his grunt meant.
Yes.
And I don't know if it was even intentional by him, but we stopped, and I was like, just so you know, I really saw that this threw her off, and I think that you should recognize, like, to try to refrain, because like I could see it was like taking us down the wrong road.
Yeah. They were able to get back on track. Yeah.
We were able to get back on track. It was a very tense meeting.
Yeah.
They had not talked in a long time, and we actually got some mojo towards the end of it, but the first 45 minutes of this meeting was like very quiet and like tense, and not, they were very guarded. And so like, how do I deal with that? If, for an example, we start going like over the little things. I want to build momentum. So I didn't know much about their situation, but I started like with like, so they had told me that they were going to sell their house or someone. So I was like, so I see that cool painting behind you. Is that significant? No, then it's just from a flea market. I was like, what about do you guys have artwork or anything of particular value that like, that you'll have to kind of divide when we sell? No, I think we could take care of that. The pots and pans. Yeah, no, that's silly. Like we're not at that level. And I'm like, good. Okay. So like you guys will be able to go through, and they're both like, yeah. And now we're on the track.
Yeah.
So now we can move. You guys both have cars? Oh yeah, they're old, but I mean, Scott, do people worry about the cars? Well, some do. Let me tell you how it works. They're like, no, we'll just keep our own car. Okay. So now we're like, now I know there's more difficult stuff coming.
Yeah.
If there was.
That's interesting that you've connected. Building momentum and taking the small agreements helps heightened emotions. Like I was asking the question like they were two separate things, but in your world, they're actually connected. It sounds like that can kind of soften some of the like heightened emotional responses. I love what you said about body language, because I've noticed in my own marriage, I'll narrate body language, either my own or Boyd's. So we had a discussion the other night where he was very passionate about something political and I was more neutral about it. And so it was just this little tension that it was so dumb that it kind of heightened, but he was tired. I was kind of in the middle of preparing for something, and it was at night, which isn't always our best time. And it was here in this office. So that's the door to the hallway. And so I had turned my face away from my laptop to talk to him. And when the conversation started to get heated, he started closing the door where his face was like just in the door. And it was so interesting. It was totally, neither one of us likes conflict. So his body language was
Yeah.
like, I actually don't want to be doing this. And so I stopped. I was able to like breathe for a second and I just narrated it. And I said, oh, I noticed that you're starting to close the door. Like, I think this conversation
Yeah.
is like over, like it's not productive. And it was just this interesting. I've also done that with, in the beginning of our marriage, when I didn't feel like he listened as well as he does now, I would say to him, oh, it looks like you're looking at your phone and you're talking to me at the same time. Do you want to put your phone down? And or when you're ready, to just talk to me. And
Yeah.
this was more when we both started working from home. So it was really hard
Uh,
to toggle between family life and work life, and we had to work
totally.
out boundaries and all that. And it seems, as I'm describing it, it could seem a little condescending or a little like, I used to be a preschool teacher, so a little like preschool teacherish. But in reality, when you take a moment to say something neutral like that, it can kind of disrupt the emotional pattern that you're in, and the other person can be like, oh yeah, I am shutting the door in your face right now. Maybe I am done with this conversation.
Yeah.
So I love the
And
body
here's
language
what
piece. Yeah.
and another thing, I mean, I tell my kids this too, so and you probably tell people this all the time. So this is not a genius thing that Scott said, but
Yeah.
when people are having conflict between the mediation sessions, it's really important to keep things peaceful, like so that we can do the hard work of figuring out, what the agreement terms are. And some people will share like, this is what he or she sent me, in between our last mediation
Yes.
session and this session. I'm like, it takes one of you guys to stop that. So
Yeah.
if one of you stops responding and stops going down that rabbit hole, and I'm not saying I'm better than you. I could show you my text right with my wife sometimes. It's not always pretty, but like one of you stops the BS and like just, the other person will get on board with it eventually, and
Yeah.
they'll stop doing that. So that's obviously a huge thing for co-parents later, like, just focusing on, on the issues and the kids, and not kind of being going down the attack route. But one
Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask you, Paige, is, and this is hard for a lot of people,
Mhm.
and this is a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients come to me and say they've never, I say, okay, do you guys have shared bank accounts? And they go, no, we each have our own.
Mhm.
We never had joint bank accounts. And I don't know. I just wanted to just mention that to people. Like, a lot of people that get divorced are not sharing money.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
and in California, the money is both of yours, no matter where it is, if it's
Yeah.
in the marriage. So
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. I don't want to be like too forward, but I encourage people. Like, I think that has a mental component to it, that you're not fully forming a team
Yes.
when you're not sharing finances.
Yeah.
And I know that's scary, and I know I don't want to, that's not legal advice or anything, but,
No.
um, I think that refraining from like creating a shared financial situation and feeling and forming that team, leads to separation.
Yeah. I can tell you in conversations that I've had, especially with women, I always encourage people to know more about their money. So if there are two separate accounts or two different ways of dealing with money, my curiosity is always why, what does that serve? What are your values? And bring it to the partnership. Talk about, and this is even with, I'll help small businesses sometimes because two friends will go in business together, or
Totally.
somebody wants to go into business with maybe a social friend, because I help a lot of people in midlife. So there's a lot of career interests and pivots and entrepreneurship. And I agree with what you're saying. I think it's wonderful for our audience to hear that. And the way that I go about it, and this is kind of my philosophy and everything, is just put it in the light. Get it in the light. Like,
Get
the
it
more
right.
you can verbalize and articulate what matters to you and saying, this means something to me. I love using that phrasing with partners. Like, bring that phrase to your partners. It would mean a lot to me if, and then make your request, or, if we talked more about money, or if we had a joint account so we could practice, money is so tricky. It's so there's
Money's
oh
tricky.
my goodness, and there's so much from your childhood. There's so many messages. There's so many cultural messages. There's so many shadows around how we feel about it. So even just to have one conversation about money where one of you doesn't leave is winning. Like just staying in the room,
Yeah.
staying at the table. Do you ever
And I
actually
see,
on that note, Scott, do you ever call a timeout? Like do you ever like have people
yeah,
take a break and then come back to the
yeah,
table?
I do. We call it a walk around the building.
Okay, good.
Uh,
Yeah, that makes sense.
so, yeah, so most of our work is all three of us in the same room, virtually or in person. But very rarely, but occasionally, I will put people in separate rooms and do the whole back and forth. But most of the time, I'm really trying to keep everyone in the same room so they hear each other.
Yeah.
Um, it's not about like positioning or posturing in mediation. Like I know people start up here and here, and that idea is like to meet in the middle. Most of the time, like that's kind of like BS. I mean, most of the time, like if you hear the person directly, you kind of naturally will come to like more equitable, solutions from
Yeah.
the beginning. But yeah, we pause when it's very emotional. I'll walk out, get some water with them. I'll ask
Mhm.
if they want some ice or gum or candy or chocolate. I have all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emotions that go into this process, and
How do you handle your
I'm an
own?
empathetic person.
Like how do you
Yeah, I
handle
mean,
your own experience if
I don't want to
it's
sound cruel. Yeah, I mean, so I when I come home and I talk to my wife about stuff, I kind of almost feel like I'm watching a movie sometimes.
yeah.
Not that I'm not participating in it, but like the things that are being said are really like interpersonal sometimes. And like, I've been doing this work like a long time, and it doesn't like you know, I understand what's being said, but
Yeah.
in the moment, I'm also trying to be impartial. So most often one person is very emotional, the other person is feeling like the emotional part is like not a game, but it's like they're worried that I'm going to be impacted to feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
So like I avoid that.
Yeah, sure.
It's
Because you don't want
important
to
that like
triangulate. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not trying to. I want to show that I want to acknowledge the acknowledge it, but like I can't like become too impacted by it because the other person's on a heightened alert at that point to make sure like that I'm not
Sure.
being impacted, then I'm staying neutral.
Yeah, I love that. I actually think the skill of observing your life as a movie is a really important skill that all of us could do a better job at because if you have that viewpoint of it's not positive or negative, it just is what it is and I'm watching this and I can observe my inner response to it. If people had more of that, I would imagine that there would be less divorce, because it wouldn't be so personal and it's all this like this world of pain coming at you when in some ways it's all about your partner's own pain, and I don't know, I just think observing with neutrality is like the key to being responsive. And I would imagine in your line of work, it's a lot about reaction versus response. I
Yeah,
think when a conversation goes off rails, it's because it gets so reactive. We've lost the front part of our brain.
exactly. And that goes back to making sure that they've heard each other,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
some people, sometimes, a lot of times people are responding, and I'm like, wait, hold up one second. I didn't hear
Yeah.
that.
I've said that same thing. I didn't
What
hear
did you
that.
think? What did you think they said? And
Yeah.
they said, oh, well, they didn't say it, but like 4 years ago, their mother told me, and I'm like, we're here.
Yeah.
The 2015 trip to England, that 2020 Thanksgiving at mom's house, none of that is relevant to the
Yeah.
here and now
Yeah.
with me. Like, so we got to figure out solutions. But I love what you said in terms, yeah, I totally agree. And, in terms of divorce, and I know you don't want to, there's studies that show that most people regret divorce later.
Yeah.
And they find out through their second or third marriages or their future relationships that it turns out it wasn't all the other person's fault.
Yes.
They both both people, play a role, and both people could change that reality to make you know you kind of are responsible for your own happiness in a way, right? And
Absolutely.
but like the studies show that people in their 70s that look back on their divorce feel regret.
Yeah.
They also feel tremendous regret if they litigate the divorce, because most people come together later in life and they become friends with their first, with their
Mm-hmm.
spouse, their divorced spouse, over the grandchildren. And
Yeah.
the studies also show that they have tremendous regret on how they navigated the process if they let it get, ugly.
Yeah.
Uh, so how do we stop that? It's like you said, being more aware of, less reactionary, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. But the bottom line is, I would love people to get divorced less. I don't think it's most of the time better.
Yeah.
Their lives aren't better. Their kids' lives, can be impacted. Kids are resilient though, but they can be impacted in their financial situation. Unless you're extremely wealthy, you're going to feel the difference.
Sure.
Um, but I also see a lot of success stories in the transitions. Because I'm in San Diego, I do see people that I've worked with from time to time, and they'll come up and they'll be like, a stay-at-home mom who hadn't worked in 12 years and was so legitimately, like, so scared about like what those next steps look like. They'll tell me about their career success
Yeah.
and how they got out there, and how you could just tell they're so proud of themselves.
Yeah.
And they've achieved, a lot, and they've taken responsibility, and just to have really changed their situation from that fear of the unknown to their new reality. And it's really inspiring.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish people got divorced in less numbers.
Sure. Me too. I feel like one of the themes that I hear in the things that you're sharing, and just that I know now about your work, is this idea of being curious. And when you say, okay, I don't know how we stop that, how do we get more less reactive, more responsive? And you're naturally curious, like just your energy around, well, I ask this, what did you hear? Like, that's a question. Or I say, I imagine that you would have to define co-parenting before you could even have a conversation about co-parenting. You have to get curious about what each individual's definition of co-parenting is. And curiosity is a huge part of my work too. And I think for people listening, that is an answer, is how curious can you be about your partner now? And if you are in a place in a tension in any relationship in your life, rather than turning away from the conflict and away from the tension, is to face it and get curious about it from this position of observing. What can I learn about what this person really wants? People in conflict, they want something. I had to learn that. I'm sure you've learned that being at the table with people. It's like you have your natural way of being, and it sounds like you were pretty curious about people growing up naturally, and just the glue, as you said, and peacekeeping. And I'm like that too in my life. But then there's this other level of, can you handle the discomfort of tension, and have the curiosity be the bigger energy there, and just kind of breathe through your discomfort and say, well, if I don't find out, if I don't know more, we can't agree. So it has a lot to do with
I
that.
totally agree. We're on the same wavelength, Paige.
Peacekeeping. So tell me how you got the moniker. You call yourself Chief Peacekeeper. I want to understand that. And was that how you arrived to the profession? Did you immediately game on, you were with Laura, this is my calling, or have you gotten better at your job?
Yeah.
So tell us about the
Well,
Peacekeeping.
I think I've gotten better. But I was very energetic about trying to help people from the very get-go. That energy might have waned a little bit over all these years.
Yeah.
No, but
I get it.
It's been countered by the increase in knowledge and understanding, and just being able to read the room. But it kind of took off from the beginning. I was definitely very focused on mediation for family law, right from the beginning. I didn't want to litigate. I've been on this train, all these years since. Chief Peacekeeper came about in about 2012. So I was working as a mediator for a divorce for a couple that were Native Americans. That one of them was on uh, the tribal council for their tribe,
Mm.
and we did the signing. So when so it's a little, people think it's a little strange, but we do typically sign like all the agreements and stuff at my office together.
Mhm.
Some people do like take pictures. Most some people are sad. Some
Yeah.
people just come in and don't say much and we sign. Others are, chit chatty and exchange. Oh, here's this. And they're, like I've had people cut out school photos like, oh, this came
Yeah.
home, and they're like exchanging those. And other people are taking pictures of like that. They want me to take a picture of them signing like the settlement agreement.
Yeah.
So it all things, but this couple, she looked up at me when she was signing and she said, "You're my chief peacekeeper."
Oh.
And so I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, I'm going to steal that from you. Is that
Yeah.
okay?"
Yeah.
So that's kind of how
It
it
came
came.
out of an
She said
experience.
that.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, she said it, and I said, I asked if it's cheat. Is that like, am I able to use, like, is that offensive? She said
Yeah.
no. I
Yeah.
just tell people that it came from me. But yeah, so like I trademarked it basically. I
Yeah.
like just went on the website. I just thought it kind of defined like what I was about.
Yeah.
And I'll be driving, and sometimes I'll hear the word chief. I'm like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of what I'm known by.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I like what you
so
said earlier when I asked about conflict. The most important thing you said was agreeing that we want this, we want to get through the problem, and the problem is actually the problem, and the two of us are
yes,
together. And so by you leading with that moniker or that nickname, it to me it's keeps the most important thing the most important thing. We want to get through
yeah,
this. We want to keep some sense of peace. We both want there to be a happier future, and that even if one person wants out and the other one doesn't, the happier future is the person getting out ultimately, as hard as that is, and to create some shared vision of what that could look like. I don't know. I think it's a
and if
great
someone
way.
wants out, like that other person may find a future relationship that maybe is more fulfilling to
Of course. Yeah.
and they can show their kids what a loving relationship
Yeah.
looks like in this next steps to them, and that's important too, right? Like kids, people say stay for the kids. Of course, there's something to that, but there's also something showing the kids like what love and like what like commitment and like what a nurturing partnership looks like. And if you're like this, like if like my parents, like the second that we
Yeah.
walked out the door at 18, all of a sudden
Yeah.
they were divorcing. It's like, well, that wasn't a
Yeah.
surprise,
You knew it was
with them
coming.
at 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also felt weird, like right at like the second that we graduated, it was like kind of felt like we were like the ones holding them back,
Yes.
which,
Yes.
a lot of people do. They wait until their kids are out of the house, but there's something, that could be strange too.
Well, kids can feel it. Yeah. I think what you're standing for is an honest peace, not just peace on the outside, but something that is aligned and full of integrity. What has surprised you about, what you've learned when people are trying to resolve conflict and when it's going well in a way that you didn't expect it? What does that look like?
That's an interesting question. I have had people get back together. Like you said, it's maybe like one a year or one every couple of years, but I'm often surprised that people are like some couples that I'm working with. Like, there seems to be a lot of love
Yeah.
there, and like I never asked the question, but I see a lot of generosity in what I do. That was like if I could go back and talk to younger Scott, that would be like what I would tell myself that was surprising. People think that, yeah, I deal with a lot of conflict and sometimes it's heavy and it can be challenging for me to deal with too. But uh, as much of the negative, I see the positive, almost 50-50. People show each other more generosity. They want to oftentimes set each other up like, for success. They're not trying to defeat the other person or punish them. Like I said, that does happen, but like we're also, the generosity, the love, and I oftentimes am feeling like, am I going to hear from this couple that they're going to try to reconcile? Because sometimes it's the first time that they're really having honest, open conversations in a number of years, and they're like kind of spark that you can feel that like mojo is like coming back, but when does it actually happen? There's not like one set of circumstances that takes it over that edge or not, but the collaboration, like I said, helps. And the collaboration of having that joint, financial partnership or those joint conversations so that everyone's going to know, like you said, just furthering that collaboration and that teamwork element in our lives makes people feel better.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I love that. Thank you so much, Scott. What a joy to have you.
Yeah.
To get you to myself for a whole hour. I know we see each other in passing, and I always love your vibe, but to get you for a whole hour and really hear about your life is really a joy.